You know what's actually terrifying? Not being wrong. Being wrong is fine. Wrong is fixable. What's terrifying is sounding completely right, confident, polished, authoritative, while having absolutely no idea what you're talking about. That's the thing that kept me up at night. Still does. I spent my whole career around the smartest people in the world. Nobel laureates, weapons designers, mathematicians who could hold 10 dimensions in their head before breakfast. And I'll tell you something I noticed, something nobody really likes to admit. A lot of what passes for deep understanding is just very expensive vocabulary. Let me show you what I mean. Early in my career, I'm sitting in a faculty meeting. A professor, brilliant man, genuinely, is explaining why metal expands when you heat it. And he's going on about thermodynamic agitation, lattice vibration amplitudes, molecular excitement states. Very impressive. Everyone's nodding, I'm nodding, and then something hits me. Wait, strip all that away. What did he actually say? The atoms move around more when it's hot. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else was costume. The jargon didn't explain anything. It just dressed up the observation in clothes that made it harder to question. And here's what bothered me most. Nobody in that room felt the gap, because the words were big enough and confident enough that the gap became invisible. That's the trick. That's the whole trick. There's a difference, a real important difference, between knowing the name of something and knowing something. My father taught me this before I ever set foot in a classroom. We'd walk through the woods together, he and I, and he'd point at a bird. Dickie, he'd say, that bird right there. In English, it's called a thrush. In Portuguese, a pombo. In Chinese, something else entirely. And then he'd stop, and he'd look at me and say, now you know what that bird is called in every language on earth, and you still know absolutely nothing about it. That landed. It really landed, because he was right. The name is a handle. It lets you grab onto the thing in conversation, file it, reference it, but it tells you nothing about why the bird sings at dawn, how it navigates thousands of miles without a map, what it's actually doing when it tilts its head and looks at you. The name is the beginning of a social transaction. It is not the beginning of understanding. Now think about how much of what we call expertise is really just naming things faster and more confidently than other people. Medical jargon, economic models, psychological frameworks. I'm not saying they're useless. They're not. But there's a particular flavor of confidence that settles on a thing, gives it a name, and then quietly stops asking questions, as though the label itself was the answer. As though once you call something market equilibrium or cognitive dissonance, you've explained why it happens rather than just describe that it does. That flavor of confidence, that's the one I never trusted. Here's where this stopped being abstract for me. Los Alamos, the Manhattan Project. The greatest collection of scientific brains ever assembled in one building. If human intelligence was going to protect itself from blind spots, surely it would be there, right? Among those people? Wrong. I watched it happen in real time. I watched brilliant physicists defer to certain people, not because those people had better arguments, not because their math was tighter, but because of rank, reputation, the way they carried themselves when they walked into a room. An idea from a senior figure would survive for weeks, months, picking up momentum, while an identical idea from a junior researcher got politely ignored. Same idea, different collar, and nobody thought they were doing it. That's the part that gets you. Nobody in that room believed they were letting hierarchy contaminate their thinking. They all believed they were following the evidence. That's how invisible it was. So I started testing it, not with physics, with safes. The classified documents at Los Alamos were kept in filing cabinets and safes that everyone assumed were impenetrable. The assumption was absolute. Nobody questioned it because the safes looked serious, they were government issued, and the people who installed them were confident. So I started picking them. I taught myself safecracking from a book, figured out the mechanics, started working combinations. And I got in, repeatedly. I left little notes inside. I borrowed document number such and such, signed Feynman, just to make a point. The point wasn't the prank. The point was this: the security of those safes existed almost entirely in people's minds. The trust was inherited, not tested. Nobody had actually tried the combination. They'd assumed, because of reputation and appearance and authority, that the thing was what it claimed to be. And I kept thinking, how many ideas work the same way? How many theories, how many models, how many expert conclusions are sitting in a safe that nobody has actually tried to open? There's a name for the extreme version of this. I called it cargo cult science. And it works like this. After World War II, anthropologists documented something strange on islands in the South Pacific. During the war, cargo planes had landed there, full of food, medicine, supplies. When the war ended and the planes stopped coming, some islanders built replica airstrips out of wood and palm leaves. They made headphones from coconut shells. They lit fires along the runways at night. They did everything the airports looked like, every ritual, every physical form, hoping the planes would return. They had the shape of the thing exactly right. They were missing the mechanism entirely. That's what happens in science, and in expertise generally, when people focus on performing rigor rather than doing it. When you run the study but design it so it can't fail, when you build the model but never ask what data would prove it wrong, when you write the paper in the right format with the right citations in the right journal, and the underlying question of whether any of it is actually true gets quietly crowded out. Here's the test I always used, the one I kept coming back to. If I can't explain it to a curious 12-year-old, not dumb it down, not strip out the complexity, just explain it in a way that makes their eyes light up with genuine understanding, then one of two things is true. Either I don't fully understand it yet, or nobody does. And both of those things are worth saying out loud. They're not embarrassing. They're honest. They're the beginning of real work. The problem is that saying I don't know in a field where you're supposed to be the expert feels like professional suicide. So people reach for complexity as a shield. The more complicated the explanation, the harder it is for anyone to check your work. The jargon stops being a tool for precision and starts being a fence, something that keeps the curious people out. And in walks the cargo cultist, coconut headphones on, wondering why the planes aren't landing. Now, here's where I have to turn the lens around. Because if I let this become a story where I'm the skeptic hero who saw through everyone else's nonsense, that would itself be a kind of nonsense. I was wrong, publicly, confidently wrong, more times than I'd like to admit. There was a period where I was so committed to a particular approach in quantum electrodynamics, my own approach, the path integral formulation, that I resisted some results longer than I should have. The math was beautiful. I loved it. And loving your own framework is a bias just as real as deferring to authority. The failure mode isn't just trusting experts too much. It's also trusting yourself too much. It's thinking that because you've broken a few safes, you can't be locked out of one. And here's the harder problem. The one I don't have a clean answer to. We need experts. That's just true. You cannot rederive aerodynamics from first principles every time you board a plane. You cannot run your own double-blind trial before you take a medication. The world is too complex, too specialized, too deep in every direction for any one person to verify everything from scratch. So the question isn't whether to trust experts. The question, the really difficult one, is how do you trust them without surrendering your own thinking entirely? How do you benefit from accumulated human knowledge without just inheriting all of its blind spots along with it? I don't have a formula. I genuinely don't. But I have a habit. Whenever someone explains something to me, expert or not, I ask, either out loud or in my head, what experiment would change your mind? What observation, what data, what result would make you say, okay, I was wrong about this? If they can answer that question clearly, even roughly, I trust them a great deal more, because that means their belief is attached to reality. It can be updated. It can be wrong in a productive way. If they can't answer it, if the question seems to confuse or irritate them, if they start talking about consensus and authority and credentials instead of evidence, I pay attention very differently. Not because they're lying. They might not be. But because a belief that can't be tested can't really be trusted, even by the person holding it. That's the honest position. And I find the honest position is almost always more interesting than the comfortable one. Here's where it gets bigger. Bigger than me, bigger than physics, bigger than any single expert in any single room. We live in a world right now, and I mean this literally, where the systems that run our lives are more complex than any individual human brain can fully evaluate. The financial instruments that determine whether you can buy a house, the algorithms that decide what information you see, the pharmaceutical pipelines that produce your medications, the climate models that governments use to make decisions that will affect billions of people. These systems are not secret, but they might as well be, because understanding them requires years of specialized training that almost nobody has. And trusting the people who do have that training requires exactly the kind of inherited, untested confidence that I've been talking about this whole time. This isn't a conspiracy. There's no group of experts sitting in a room deciding to deceive everyone. It's more uncomfortable than that. It's structural. The complexity is real. The specialization is necessary. And yet, a culture that loses the habit of asking, a culture that decides that questioning experts is naive or disrespectful or dangerous, that culture becomes fragile in a very specific way. It becomes unable to catch its own mistakes, and the mistakes compound. What worries me isn't any particular wrong idea. Wrong ideas get corrected eventually if the process is working. What worries me is a process that stops working, a culture that mistakes fluency for understanding, confidence for evidence, and reputation for truth. Because at that point, you're not doing science anymore. You're doing something that looks exactly like science. Same airstrip, same runway lights, same coconut headphones, and you're waiting for planes that are never going to come. So let me bring this all the way back to you. Not institutions, not governments, not fields and journals and committees. You, specifically right now watching this, think about the last time you nodded along to something you didn't actually understand. Maybe it was a financial advisor explaining your portfolio, a doctor using a term you didn't ask him to define, a politician explaining an economic policy with numbers that moved too fast to follow, a pundit on television who seemed so certain that questioning him felt almost rude. Did you stop them? Did you ask the question? Probably not. I know I didn't sometimes, because there's a social cost to saying, wait, I don't understand that. It feels like admitting weakness. It feels like slowing things down for everyone else. It feels, in the moment, like the polite thing is to nod. But that nod, that quiet, well-meaning, socially lubricated nod, that is exactly where it gets handed off. That is where inherited trust becomes unchecked assumption, becomes invisible error, becomes the kind of mistake that takes a generation to undo. The question you didn't ask, that one lives somewhere. It didn't disappear just because you swallowed it. My father gave me something that was worth more than any degree. He gave me permission to not know. He made not knowing feel like the beginning of something, not the end of it. He made it feel like the most alive position you could be in, standing in front of a bird, knowing its name in 12 languages, and still having the whole real question open in front of you. What experiment would change your mind? That's it. That's the whole thing. You don't have to be a physicist. You don't have to challenge everyone you meet. You just have to keep that question somewhere in your head, alive and accessible, and pull it out when something important is being handed to you as settled fact. Because the safes are everywhere, and most of them have never actually been tested. And some of them are holding things that matter, really matter, and nobody has thought to try the combination. I'm not telling you to distrust everyone. I'm telling you to stay curious enough to check. That's the difference. And it's not a small one.